Ukraine has started urgent and closed-door talks with Europeans amid new threats from the Kremlin to attack the Ukrainian capital and signals that Russia is preparing a new offensive from the north toward Kyiv. It is reported that Ukraine's chief negotiator and secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, urgently arrived in Berlin the day before for talks, amid Russia's warning to foreign diplomats to leave Kyiv due to planned airstrikes. At the same time, Belarus accused Ukraine of repeated incursions by Ukrainian drones into its territory. Allegedly, just in the past week, more than 100 drones have entered Belarus. And experts are already calling this an attempt to find a pretext for aggression or to increase the concentration of troops at the border. This is also related to the recent phone conversation between French President Emmanuel Macron and the Belarusian dictator Alexander Putin. But is there a real threat of an offensive on Kyiv from Belarus? And why are Ukraine and Europe actually holding urgent closed-door negotiations? These are the questions we will answer in this episode. I'm Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this together. But before we start, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, leave any comment under this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. And friends, if by the end of the episode you think this video was interesting and useful, I would appreciate your support for this YouTube channel with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video or by the QR code on your screens. So the other day, Politico revealed a scoop. The chief negotiator from Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, went to Europe to meet with the national security advisors of the E3 group. These are Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. Interestingly, the spokesperson for German Chancellor Friedrich Merz declined to comment, citing the confidential nature of the meeting. The Embassy of Ukraine in Berlin also declined to comment. Umerov, who is the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, was reportedly in Brussels on Monday for talks with senior officials of the European Commission about cooperation in the defense industry. And he arrived in Berlin early in the morning on Tuesday. As the publication writes, diplomatic engagement is taking place at a crucial moment after Russia carried out a massive attack on Kyiv over the weekend and threatened further consecutive and systematic strikes. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, let me remind you, has urged diplomats and foreign citizens to leave Kyiv as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the European Union ambassador to Ukraine rejected this demand, saying, quote, "We are staying in Kyiv, we are staying with Ukraine." Well, by the way, I talked about this in more detail in the previous episode on this topic. Both the Americans and the Europeans basically said, Russians, who are you trying to scare? Your scare tactics don't work. What you sent out there, listen, just hide yourselves and don't show up at all. And here comes an interesting point. Why did Umerov decide to talk specifically with the Europeans and behind closed doors? US Secretary of State Marco Rubio already stated on Friday that America has refused to participate in peace talks on Ukraine, which it had been conducting all this time, saying that they, quote, unfortunately, were not fruitful. And Marco Rubio added, if someone else wants to handle this, let them try. And so, in recent weeks, European officials have been discussing whether they should reach out directly to President Vladimir Putin of Russia for negotiations. And they even considered putting forward someone as a sort of European representative, for example, Angela Merkel, or the President of Finland, Alexander Stubb. And now Merkel has already said, no, sorry, I don't want to talk to that bald idiot, that's enough, I've already embarrassed myself with him before. I've already damaged my reputation by ever interacting with that bald idiot, so sorry, I won't be communicating with Putin. But Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, is already hinting that, in principle, he is ready to represent a united Europe if it comes to direct negotiations with Putin. The German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful stated earlier this month that the E3 group, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, is, quote, making a new attempt to resume negotiations. At the same time, Europe will play a bigger role in the coming weeks and months. In December, let me remind you, Merkel held peace talks for Ukraine in Berlin with the participation of the Americans, but not the Russians. There was a small, but still some progress. So the idea is that now the Europeans are against it. They are trying to fully take over the negotiations themselves. And now the new E3 talks with Rustem Umerov in Berlin are taking place against the backdrop of tensions between Merz and Zelensky. after the German Chancellor released a letter, an open letter, offering Ukraine a limited associate membership in the European Union before potentially becoming a full member of the EU at a later stage. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, rejected this proposal. Merz said over the weekend that Ukraine should have full and equal membership in the European Union. Merz did not stop there. Let me remind you, earlier he suggested that this associate membership in the EU could be offered to Ukraine as a concession, which would allow Zelensky to gain public support from Ukrainians for another concession, giving up territories occupied by Russia as part of a peace settlement. So, Merz's idea was that Zelensky should tell Ukrainians, look, I achieved associate membership in the EU, so let's give up a part of Donbass and finally end this war. But what exactly Merz is holding closed-door talks about in Berlin? Now that's interesting. Because in recent days, against the backdrop of new threats from the Russians to attack Kyiv, Zelensky's team is talking more and more about Vladimir Putin preparing an offensive on Kyiv. In addition, just the other day, Alexander Lukashenko had a phone conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron. And the conversation, it is claimed, took place at France's initiative. And importantly, Macron emphasized the risks for Belarus associated with possible involvement in Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. The French warned Lukashenko, telling him it's best not to get involved in this war. But let's put it this way, is Belarus really ready to get involved in the war and even launch an offensive on Kyiv? That's important. Today, the State Secretary of the Security Council of Belarus, Alexander Volfovich, stated that Ukrainian drones regularly penetrate Belarusian territory. According to him, just in the past week, there have been 116 such incidents. Allegedly, 116 drones from Ukrainian territory entered Belarus. In response, by the way, the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine stated, quote, "Just imagine how much we had to restrain ourselves to keep silent about such large-scale provocations by Ukrainians. This is absurd. You have to admit it's odd. If he says 116 drones entered, why was he silent before?" And in this regard, I just want to briefly share with you some recent analysis from Konstantin Mashevets regarding Belarus. Because for years he's been providing the most accurate information, so this analysis is really in depth. And to put it briefly, the situation is as follows. Right now, it's quiet on the border. There are no offensive groups coming from Belarus. The Belarusians are just covering the border with literally about 35,000 troops. Yes, the Belarusians and Russia have formed a joint force. All the plans and deployment schemes have long been written out and are ready. But in practice, all this talk about a new assault on Kyiv is just scare tactics for now. To actually advance from the north, both Russia and Belarus would need a new large-scale wave of mobilization. The Belarusian army by itself is not serious enough for anything significant. At most, they could enter a couple of Ukrainian villages near the border and establish a small foothold there. Of course, for the Kremlin, Belarus entering the war would be a gift, because in any case it would force Ukraine to pull reserves and reconsider its defense. But there's a huge problem with supplies here. Over the years of the full-scale war, let's be honest, Russia has taken almost all the equipment and ammunition from Belarus. Seriously, there were tons of reports about them moving things from there. So in the end, there's zero strategic sense in Belarus launching an independent offensive on Kyiv. The Kremlin is just using this topic now to put psychological pressure on Ukrainians and try to divert our reserves. Without a large mobilization in both countries, there won't be a real strike from the north, as our Mashevets says. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, give it a like, and click the bell so you don't miss new episodes. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially by donating through the links and details in the description of this video. And also check out the description, I have a little surprise for you there, especially for those who want to learn foreign languages. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Bye everyone.